Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Let me thank you for coming on this Friday afternoon. It's not usual that we have press conferences on a Friday afternoon, but Cabinet was in fact held today, Friday, because as you are aware, the Attorney General and myself would have traveled to the Bahamas yesterday. We left here 4 o'clock in the morning and we returned just after midnight last night. And we were able to visit with our colleagues and representatives of the Bahamian government and other regional organizations, along with the chairman of CARICOM. As you're aware, I am on the Bureau of CARICOM and will become chair of the Caribbean community in January for our rotation from January to June, and therefore would have accompanied as well. But in our own deliberate efforts, we have been maintaining, perhaps more than any other issue since I have come to this office, we have had to articulate our position on climate change and the consequences of global warming to our region and to our civilization and to our way of life. I've been thinking about this a lot, and just now in discussion with Cabinet made the point that the world may well come to be regarded in the Caribbean. The world will come to be regarded as BM and AM, before Maria and after Maria. Because in a very real sense, it was in 2017, and some may argue had Irma and Maria, but Maria is what, more than any other, prior to Dorian, would have caused the rest of the world to fully appreciate that the intensity of these hurricanes and systems which we are facing, along with other aspects of the consequences of climate change, which includes the sargassum weed, which is having a negative impact and in some cases a disastrous impact on some businesses throughout the region. And by the region, we don't only mean the countries of the English-speaking Caribbean, but we mean the entire Caribbean countries, and in fact, Mexico and others. All of the Caribbean states, for want of a better phrase. And Caribbean states include the southern states of the United States of America, and even some on the eastern seaboard. So that the bottom line is that we have reached a position where, if anything else, today is to signal that we have to move forward in a different manner in how we approach our problems to this new reality. This is our new norm. In fact, more than anything else yesterday, when they kept asking us questions, the Bahamian media and the international media with whom we spoke, we made the point, this is our new norm. And we have to be ready for any and all eventualities, do things differently. And that is an exercise that, regrettably, it has taken the loss of lives and the tragedy and horror of Maria and now Dorian to reinforce. But I suspect that those people in the region who hitherto would have used the excuse of a hurricane watch or warning or tropical storm watch or warning to have a Lime or effect will now understand that the days of hurricane Limes and tropical storm Limes really ought to be reserved only for the utter foolhardy and people who don't like themselves or their family. Because what we saw in Nassau was horrific, and what we heard with respect to the stories is equally heart-wrenching. There but for the grace of God goes I. And that statement has more meaning for us as Barbadians than at any other time, because where was Dorian first threatening? It was Barbados. And I have reflected that the last 2 weekends really, in my mind, stand out as the tale of 2 weekends with Dorian. because the first Sunday and Monday, it was us at the end of August. And the last Sunday and Monday, it was the people of Abaco, Grand Bahama, and by wider extension, with the tropical storm winds, all of the Bahamas. And in both instances, Dorian behaved in ways that hitherto are not part of the norm. In the case of Barbados, the tail of Dorian was that this one was not dodging us, or we were not dodging that one, to put it better. It was not going to miss us like 99%, that this one was really coming at us. And Bajans saw it for themselves. And we waited, and we waited, and we waited. And what transpired did not in any way equate to what we know and understand what a tropical storm that was hovering on a Category 1 hurricane can bring and usually brings. What transpired was in fact far less rain and far less wind than we would otherwise have expected, such that, knockwood, thank God, we did not see the scale of destruction, property damage, or injury that might otherwise have been associated with that system. What we understood from the meteorologists was that dry air was responsible for sucking the convection out, and therefore Barbados, in spite of the fact that it was fully in the sights of the storm, got off virtually unscathed from Dorian. I've been living for 53 years, and I've been around a few storms and hurricanes. And what happened with us is almost inexplicable for me. The scientists have told us why. And some have even joked and argued that at last the Sahara, Barbados, having been the subject of much much negative blame and common consequences for how people with their sinuses deal with it for years, but that Sahara dust was able to help create that effectively denuded the power of Dorian. Jump forward a week. And the same system that behaved differently with us behaved differently now in a different way. It went in to waters, first of all, by not going over Puerto Rico and the mountains in Puerto Rico. It went in, it was able to retain its strength, but it then went into waters that are slightly warmer than they might otherwise have been, creating the perfect opportunities along with the other things like wind shear and high pressure systems and the absence of a steering current and all of that we've now learned about from the meteorologists. But worse than all of that, that absence of that steering system led to what? That it sat over Abaco and Grand Bahama for almost a 36-hour period, in circumstances when these things normally move at 8 miles per hour, 10 miles per hour. When it was down by us, it was moving at 12 miles per hour. It didn't even move at 1 mile per hour at one point. It just sat stationary. And when you hear the stories of what that meant for people describing it as sledgehammers not stopping, or as if they were in some kind of atomic bomb experience, and that the noise and the wind and the gust just unrelenting. Now you can imagine pain for a half hour or an hour or two. Imagine that noise and the horror and everything else, and we haven't even started to add to that storm surge on low-lying countries. What is Barbados but a low-lying country? What is Bridgetown? What are the other areas that we face? So that all of that I've come to say because CNN will report to you the horror CMC will report to you and show you the images of the horror. Social media will also do that for you. Our duty, however, is not simply to share what we saw. Our duty is to determine how we move forward. Because to sit and do nothing would be to leave our people, not just in Barbados, but the entire region, vulnerable to a fate that is worse than war. And we have a responsibility, therefore, as Caribbean people, to start to redefine how we live and how we bolster our resilience for what is clearly a new norm. My government, therefore, is going to do a number of things. First and foremost, start to engage Barbadians to appreciate that how we build has to change. One of the things that came out clearly in Nassau was that a lot of the older houses, and the AG can confirm, the ones on stilts, for example, because if you're living on a low-lying island that basically has no elevations and that storm surge is going to come through, when you have the stilts, what happens? The water goes through and under. But when we want to start to look pretty and we're doing everything without reference to the risk and to functionality, to ventilation and to protection and to resilience, then we run into problems. In 1955, when Janet hit Barbados, I am told that I wasn't born, a full 10 years before. And some of you may have heard me say it, and I repeat it because it has to be repeated. We lost a number of houses in this country. There was even a shelter, I am told, that people went to where more than 20 people lost their lives because the shelter was a church that was eventually taken out by Janet. And some of you journalists may want to do the research into these things. But what happened afterwards was that so many people lost their house roofs that there was a shortage of skills, and in particular carpenters. And you talk to older Barbadians across the board and they tell you that because of that and because of the urgency of wanting to return to normalcy, people built houses with the help of ordinary friends and family. And those friends and family who helped build the houses, who couldn't work out how to do the trusses and the physics of roofs and gable roofs or hip roofs, as I'm sure none of us who've ever built a house can do today either. What became a temporary fix, and the category of person who did it, who became known as a storm carpenter, because they were not real carpenters, became the norm for the country. Now I'm counting on you young people in this room to help spread that message. Because what the country then did for the next 60 years is to build flat roofs. Now how many times have we seen in previous systems, Thomas and others, and you're going in north and houses lost their roofs and are all rickety. There's one in Speightstown that I remember in particular that looked as though if you touch it the house would have fallen. But the house withstood everything. And it had the traditional gable roofs. And in those gables, what do you have? Windows, fixed louvers. Fixed louvers because the wind does what? Come in and go out. My father used to tell me as a child that it was the cowshed principle. Wind comes in on the east and goes out on the west. The AG and I just looked at this building coming down to you. When this building was built, where you see glass blocks now on the steps would have been the decorative blocks that we all now have blocked up. Look at it in here to accommodate that. Long before my time, air conditioner. So that if wind comes in and can't get out, what does it do? The pressure lifts everything. So in the manifesto, we talked about our seminal capital transformation project, which is Roofs to Reefs. And that's going to take more than a decade because we didn't get here, as you just heard me, even in 10 years. We got here over 60 years. And we have to change, therefore, starting with all new build. When you go to Bermuda, what do you see? The same types of roofs, because they are trying to deal with two things at the very least, apart from the aesthetics, which makes it absolutely charming. But they're trying to deal with the collection of water, and they're trying to deal with an island that is 14 by 1 mile in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that is also hit by hurricanes. 14 by 1 mile. So that those roofs that they build are determined by their environment, and how do they withstand, how do they become resilient to the environment within which they live. And we have to pause and go back there. In the Chattel House cases, most of the roofs were gables. In the case of the wall bungalows, as they were called in those days, which were all over the country, we see them, those built in before the 1950s and 60s in particular, you had the hip roof predominantly, or sometimes you would get like a parapet and inside the roof. So the first thing we have to do is to change how we build. Cabinet today agreed that the Minister of Housing would issue requests for proposals, and we would have a town hall meeting with the architects and engineers, I hope a week from Monday, that will allow us to be able to start the process and to alert them that in the same way that almost every house built by low-income people in Barbados has the same house design. You ever study it? For the last 50, 60 years, that we need to do our people and ourselves a favor and to put out at least 3 or 4 house designs for low-income people and 3 or 4 house designs for lower middle income people. Okay? And then we need to have the Ministry of Public Affairs, once that contest is won as to whose designs we take from the architects and the engineers, that we need also, separate from what government sponsors as public housing, that we need to have the Ministry of Public Affairs do some videos and the Ministry of Education and Training do the training, so that our artisans and people who want to build on their own are given the tools to be able to prepare themselves for this new reality. That is point one. Changing how we build. And we will, at the appropriate time, also work out how best we handle it from a regulatory perspective with town planning, as well as the new buildings authority, the building code, which we accept that if we were to try to be able to approve every single house design, there would be bureaucratic tyranny in this country. So that we need to be able, particularly with those over a certain size, to shift the liability to the professionals, the engineers, the architects, the quantity surveyors, who have a duty of care anyhow, as the Attorney General would tell you, to their clients to be able to build to certain specs. We have to do it as well for earthquakes, because the notion that Barbados is not vulnerable to earthquakes was put to rest for this current generation from 2007 and then again here recently, in a way that those who lived between the 1940s and 2007 would not have experienced a hurricane. The second thing, however, that we have to do is to clean up. When the hurricane warning, or watch for that matter, it was watch, was put in place, the tropical storm watch, we set about to fast forwarding some of the work that the Ministry of Public Works would have been doing and continue to do, because let us tell the truth as well, Dorian came in August. And one of the examples of the new norm is that those things that we could have said wait till September as opposed to an October, June too soon, July stand by, August they used to tell you a must. But in our life, when did we ever see a hurricane in August of this ilk? September, remember, October, and now we're told that the all over is November 30th. So for us, 30th will not only be Independence Day, but it is a freedom of the mind under pressure from the tyranny of the weather systems. So that the season has gotten longer as well and more intense. It means then that we have to be ready. And I want to ask Barbadians to think back to what their grandparents and great grandparents had to do. Because there was no radiodiffusion that would advise them. There was no meteorological services that would have advised that a system was coming. You go home, you asleep at night, and all of a sudden you start to hear wind outside. What did our grandparents and great grandparents and their grandparents and great grandparents have to do? They had to be ready for any eventuality as far as possible. And they had. In doing that, they became a resilient people. We must now become a resilient people, not just Barbadians, but Caribbean people across the board. And that readiness, that resilience comes from us preparing ourselves for this in how we build, but also in how we keep around our environment. So that bush, my pet peeve, I've asked the Attorney General to move with dispatch for us to put a framework for ticketing, and he can speak more to it before we leave, for just rather than simply fines before the criminal court. But we're not interested really in anybody a criminal. What are we interested in? That you clean up. And if you don't clean up, well, you must pay something to allow us to go and do it for you. It's as simple as that. I don't want to make anybody a criminal. He doesn't want to make anybody a criminal. But we want all the alleys, all the canals, all the water courses, all at you. Because one blow is do what? Kill old cow. We want everybody, just keep around you. To the front, to the side, to behind you. Keep it clean. And we want you to remove all missiles. And to that extent, we are opening back up, as we told you, Bagatelle. And we hope to see the wayside for dumping soon also in the south of the island. Because the heavy cleanup must be now, because we know that very few people cleaned up for the last few years, and the government certainly did not do it. And Bagatelle was closed for what, 5-6 years? So that the amount of old fridges and old stoves and old washing machines and other things that can be missiles. You've seen the kinds of things that flew around in the Bahamas. And in the Bahamas, what went was not just wooden houses, the kind of wall houses, the kind of wall structures. Because remember, water is what? Water is coming at you with a force. That's why tsunamis, which is the extreme version of storm surge, is so destructive. And in the case of Nassau, I'm sorry, not Nassau, of Abaco, the settlement where the Haitians lived, called the mud, is as flat as the floor that you see in. No people lived in there. And how many? Enough. I don't know the exact number because I'm not sure that they know the exact number, but enough. And Bajans will understand what I mean, and Caribbean people when I say enough. Enough. I know we don't know. So the cleaning up is absolutely critical, because the cleaning up leads to flooding, and storm surge may be one in which people can die, but people in Barbados know with Karoo that flooding doesn't only happen coming from storm surge, but flooding happens also when gullies, and Barbados has more gullies than anything else. They say we have a gully for each day of the year, just like Dominica has a river for each day of the year. When those gullies are blocked, what happens? Pressure build up, and when the water come down, look what happened to Karoo that fateful night when we had the water. I will never forget, because it was the same night that we were in the morning finishing up the white paper on education reform, and we left the ministry when the rain started, only to wake up to hear about Karoo's death the next day. So cleaning up is critical, and the government will do its part, NCC will do its part, MTW will do its part, but with the best will in the world, the government, NCC, MTW cannot do it all. But the country can do it. And the country does it by Sandy, you cleaning up, by you which floods out there, by Howard's Land, not Howard's Land, Howard's Supermarket, Bushall Main Road. You look hard, what happens? If that has plastic blocking the drains and the wells out there, you got 2-3 feet of water, and you can't pass that one patch on Bushall Main Road, and it's as much a function of how we live as anything else. We've put in an additional well there now at the corner. Hopefully it will help, but we don't know, and it can't help if people go and block it with garbage or plastic or concrete bags or thing. And I can forget about the adults a little bit and go to the children of this nation, and I hope that you all carry this for the children, not tomorrow but next week or whenever they're listening, because I want the children of Barbados, because it's your world that we're protecting, I want the children of Barbados to become the premier litter police for this country. And if you see your mother, your father, your grandmother, your grandfather, your uncle, your aunt, whoever, your teacher, remind them very politely, don't be rude, but remind them that you can't love me if you want to litter in my country. You can't want better for me if you want to litter in my country. You can't want Shane a Barbados for your son to be good if we have people blocking up and doing the things that they shouldn't do. And at a different level, because Barbados does not produce the level of sugarcane that it used to, it means that a lot of our plantations also have run to bush, and a lot of the cleaning and husbandry that used to take place in preparing for planting and the crop and everything doesn't now take place in the same way. So that the cuscus grass used to make sure that the mud didn't run on, the soil didn't run on the road. The cleaning of the wells used to make sure that the flooding didn't take place there. And when you compound that with more concrete, water runs easier on concrete. So you do the blockages and then you facilitate the thing. And then apart from cleanup, how we build must change, how we clean up must change. But here we now have to go beyond our borders. They say no man is an island. Well, this battle cannot be won alone by one island. But what we do know is that we in the region must take responsibility for our own affairs. We welcome and indeed we want the outside assistance. But what we must have even before outside assistance is that we must be able as independent countries to be able to satisfy ourselves that we can become our own first responders as far as possible and as efficiently as possible. And we can't do it one-one. And that's why SEDIMA and other agencies and the RSS and others are so critical. We have to be prepared to stand with each other, because it's only a question of when. Today is Bahamas. 2017 was Barbuda, was Dominica, was British Virgin Islands, was St. Martin. The Premier of St. Martin has come here twice. Yesterday I was with the Premier from Turks and Caicos. Tortola was a wreck in 2017. We saw the boats in Tortola looking like what, little toy boats? Like how you have toy boats and toy cars. And they were all like if a little child just took them and arranged them. So what we know is that we have, as Caribbean people and as Caribbean nations, to be there with one another. The difficulty is that even with us doing that, we have to go beyond the resources of government and to allow, first and foremost, one, our populations to know that old saying. What was that old saying that we learned as a child? That you have to do what? Save for what? You all finish it before you could even finish it. Save for a rainy day. That those habits have to come back again at the individual household level. First thing. And saving at a rainy day at an individual household level, we have to do it also at the national level. And that's why a previous Barbados Labour Party government passed the legislation for a catastrophe fund. And we're going to have to revisit it, because I'm satisfied that even the rate at which it is accumulating is not sufficiently fast, given what we have to face. But even with all of that, it is unlikely to be enough, because once insurance claims start to come in the Bahamas, what do you think is going to happen to insurance premiums? Up, up, up. And it is largely because the pool is too small. My government, therefore, is going to, over the course of the next few months, work to stage in Barbados an international colloquium, inviting not just members and other representatives from the region in government, but also those on other frontline states to this new reality. If you look at it, the governors of the states moving from Texas right across to Florida in the Gulf, and those moving from Florida on the eastern seaboard right up to New England on the eastern seaboard, and even those in the provinces in Canada on the eastern seaboard are at risk, even though we accept that those at the outer edges are less likely, like Barbados, to experience it. The countries in Central America are equally affected. Mexico, Belize, Honduras, etc. And then the mayors of a number of key cities are equally affected. And we have come to accept, therefore, that what we have to do is to enlarge the pool of insurance in order to ensure that insurance remains relevant and affordable for us as citizens living in this part of the world. Make no mistake about it, we understand that we are on the front line of the battle, even though we did not cause it. It is not us, we don't have enough industrial to have made holes in the ozone layer or to cause global warming. But we know that if the Earth's temperatures rise beyond 1.5 degrees, that we are going to see even worse consequences. Your children and your grandchildren. And that's why the allies for me in this battle are not simply the governments of the world, but the children and young people of the world. And I am making bold to say that we are not going to be constrained by the geographical boundaries of Barbados in seeking to raise support for the changes that have to come about. Our target is a global audience, and our target equally are Caribbean-based governments and institutions, whether of countries or of states or of provinces or of towns and cities, because that's where the action is taken at the municipal level, at the state level, and then of course at the federal level. But equally, like all great battles, you don't win it straight off. And when the church was being built, the failure of who surrounded the church to accept the validity and the wisdom of what they were trying to do meant that in the Bible we read that where 2 or 3 are gathered in His name, there is worthiness in the effort. So Barbados expects and anticipates that not everyone will convert, because if they had, the world would not now be facing these diabolical consequences. In Zimbabwe, as we speak, Zimbabwe this year has had floods, and now it is in the middle of a drought. California and parts of Europe have seen some of the most horrific fires that cause people to lose their lives and all of their property. And I don't know which is worse, to die by fire or to die from waves, water. But both are horrific. So that we can sit back here and wait for somebody to bring a solution as Caribbean people, or we can take responsibility for our destiny. And there is no doubt in my mind, after seeing what we saw in the Bahamas yesterday, I'm reminded of what Dominica and Barbuda saw, and the notion of climate refugees becoming part of our lexicon in the region. That the time, one, to build resilience, but equally as important, to fight the actual consequences of these catastrophic events. Because if we don't plan for it at a policy level, from a financing perspective, we're not going to be able to get through. The CRIF, Caribbean Catastrophe Fund, which last year you would have seen us receive some money for Tropical Storm Kurt, exists, and it helps a little bit. But it's nowhere near. Nowhere near. Our own domestic catastrophe fund and others, I'm sure, have similar arrangements. It is nowhere near what is needed. And as a result, therefore, the major takeaway at a regional and international level is that we are no longer simply prepared to accept our fate without fight back. We are going to have to do better and to prepare for this new reality of the 21st century for our people. And for us not to do so would be to leave our people and our countries exposed, granted, to Mother Nature, but in ways that will become far worse if we do nothing, and much better if we intervene to change how we live, how we govern, how we behave, how we finance with respect to this. Simply to reflect on the tragedy of the circumstances is to accept that we must perpetually become victims, and eventually our civilization will be obliterated. That is not what any of us were born to do. Not you, not me, not any of us. And if Barbados has to start it, we will. And if we have to be able to ask others to join, we will. And if it takes time, and I am no longer in this chair and others are continuing, we shall. But this is our new reality in the region. So I look forward to being able to give you more details as we unfold the plans for this colloquium. I intend to speak to a number of regional and international leaders and bodies for us to plan to have this intervention. We have already, in the restructuring of our bonds, when we restructured our debt, domestic debt last year, we took the opportunity to include a natural disaster clause. There are very few financial instruments or bonds in the region. Grenada did it when they restructured their debt too. And what that means is that if a storm or a hurricane of a certain size or scale hits us, that we will be able to postpone for 2 years the payment of principal, and that we will postpone the payment of interest, but capitalize the interest for those 2 years and put it on to the back end of the loan. So what do you get? You get little elbow room for 2 years to spend the money that you would have spent on debt in the rebuilding of the country. And that is what you need when you have a tragedy. When you have a difficulty home at you, money that you would have used to pay the insurance or to buy something that you needed to, a washing machine that you were going to replace, you got to put it one side and use the other money now to fix the hole in the roof or the windows that broken because of the storm, to stop you from getting wet when the day come or when the night come. And all we've done is to transfer that form of behavior, and now Barbados's domestic debt bonds, which is about 80% of our domestic debt, now has those clauses. We are trying to do the same with our restructured commercial foreign debt too, because it makes sense. And let me tell you why. We can either do it orderly or it will happen in orderly fashion. Because if the place get mashed up, how you gonna find money to pay the debt? And that's why in most contracts you also have force majeure clauses, because we accept that what is the lawyers call an act of God can disturb the flow of an event. The next point that I'd like to make very quickly is that against all of that, the cabinet agreed today that we would work to be able to contribute to the Bahamian people. On Sunday, and we advised the Prime Minister Minis and his colleagues that the Barbadian people will have a telethon. I think yesterday Minister Mo and Ambassador Comijong spoke to it. And I am saying to Barbadians in particular, and through you please, that this one is particularly special for us because Dorian started here. And we more than anyone else know, even more than the people in the Carolinas and elsewhere where Dorian has continued to go, that we got off virtually unscathed from Dorian. But if Dorian had hit us, imagine what each of us would have had to spend, all like now, to be surviving. And however little and however difficult it is for both individuals, and Jano that I know, we can do a little something. We're in an IMF program, but my government has agreed that we will match whatever Barbadians put at the very least on Sunday. And therefore, I would like us to see at least $500,000. At least $500,000 donated by Barbadians on Sunday towards the people of the Bahamas. And know this, that if that first weekend the tale of Dorian was different, it would be others doing for us what I'm asking Barbadians to do for Bahamians. Secondly, we've agreed that any requests for assistance from the regional security system, that Barbados will play a major role in the supply of any troops that are needed to be able to assist the Bahamian people in maintaining law and order, because the two most important things in stabilization after a hurricane are, one, law and order to prevent looting and crime, and two, to prevent public health outbreaks because of water and stagnant and bodies and other chemicals and things that we just don't know what happens when they mix. And therefore we will play whatever role that the Bahamians ask us to. Understand this as well, that I feel for my colleague Prime Minister Minis, because the pressure of everybody's expectations coming at you at one and the same time means that in order to prioritize, you will disappoint. But you have to prioritize and save the national interest first and foremost. And the national interest first and foremost is by keeping a safe society, and then by minimizing the chances for any public health outbreaks, even before you get to the other things of cleanup and rebuilding, etc. So whatever they have to tell us, the worst thing is for everybody to decide we sending that, when in truth and in fact they need this. So we have to be patient and allow them to do the assessment. Yesterday we were present when they did the briefings, and I'm satisfied. I think the AG can say that the briefings, they are doing what they have to do, but they're equally constrained by the capacity. In flying over the Bahamas yesterday, even for me, I became acutely aware of the vastness. And when we were flying back down, I looked at it. When you look at the width of Grand Bahama, crudely so, it is virtually the same width of the state of Florida. Not the same depth or square footage, but it's the same width. And when you look at the length of Abaco, it's virtually the same length as the width of Grand Bahama. And we flew over for what, almost 2.5 hours? 3 hours? Just looking, because we still couldn't land properly. They were hoping to be able to get in there today on the ground. And we left Prime Minister Chastney and the Premier of Turks and Caicos, but I had to come back to meet with the IMF this morning. So the bottom line is that we will, as a government, match what the people of Barbados do, at the very least. And I hope, at the very least, that we can have at least $500,000 from the people of Barbados on Sunday. The money does not come to the government of Barbados. We don't even want it to touch us. We want it to go straight to SEDIMA's account. SEDIMA has agreed to open a special SEDIMA Barbados Bahamas bank account. I've explained to the country already that I don't think we should be doing donations in kind, because the logistics, we tried to carry some tarpaulins up yesterday. The plane could only carry a few. But the bottom line is that what they need now really is cash to be able to do a lot of the things that they need to do. So our contribution will be monetary, matching our people at the very least, and it will also be technical and manpower in terms of any support services that are required. And we will await any further requests, should it arise, based on the outcome of their needs assessment, which is really only now being conducted because of the complexity of being able to conduct that. If it was one landmass, you send some people up there, send a boat round, and boom, 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 boom. It's not that simple in the Bahamas, and we have to give them time to be able to do it. When I see the international media goading people and trying to say, when the government isn't doing this and the government isn't doing that, and in truth and in fact, when you get on the ground, you realize that the government is doing a lot more than people are trying to suggest. I have some sympathy and empathy for my colleague and for the people of the Bahamas. Against that background, therefore, I ask us to recognize that our future will be different, as I've said, but at the same time, let us play our part in supporting those who need our assistance as we go forward. The rains yesterday afternoon reminded us that our difficulties don't only come in the form of structured storms, but that, as I said, we have to be ready for any eventuality. And that's a partnership. And why have I spoken this long? Because at the end of the day, the people of Barbados have to understand through you the logic of what we are doing and what we're asking. And the people of the Caribbean and wider have to understand through you the logic of why we are saying that our reality must be different, and that we have, as a region now, to change how we build, to change how we clean up around us, to change how we finance and prepare for the financing of, one, becoming more resilient, but two, also fighting the battles after the catastrophe. It is why we want roofs to reefs to be characteristic of our term as a government, because each of us who do not have roofs that are adequate, we will have to work with you by showing you the designs, by helping you to save on a lot of that technical work, the money you would have to spend. The government is going to get those designs done, and we're going to try to have the engineers and the architects work with us in this battle. But at the same time, we're going to have to work with the banks and the financial sector and the credit unions to allow a lot of you to be able to change out your roofs, because you're going to pay for a disaster before or after. And it is far cheaper to pay for it before. Not to mention, it is far easier to protect your life and yourself from injury if you make sure that that roof stays on. If it goes in the storm, you're at risk. And all of that you own in that house is at risk. So if instead of doing something else, you got to change your roof, make that the priority. If you got to put in a water tank, as we're asking people to do, and to work with the water authority, and we're trying to put the mechanisms in place where the water authority can help people to get the water tanks, you do. And why? Don't let us fool ourselves. Part of the problem that we face in this country as a water scarce country is a global issue. Go on YouTube and look for the documentary or Netflix that talks about the global crisis in groundwater. And you will see the same problem in India, the same problem in Peru, the same problem in Kansas, the same problem in Morocco, where we just came from, where we went and visited the water museum. And part of the difficulty is that we are extracting groundwater as a population in the world far quicker, at a far quicker rate than it's being replenished. And when you dig deep and you pull it out, the salinity in the water increases, in which case then you can't use it in that way. So that's why you see the proliferation of desalination plants and other things, because the groundwater is being affected globally. How we live has to change. And that's why my allies, my friends, must be the children of this country and the children of the world. In a very real sense, I would like to believe that I can live to 100, but I don't feel I will. So what do we have to do? Build a bridge for those who will be here 40 and 50 and 60 years from now. AG, I've said a lot, but there are some things that I think from a legal perspective, and just your general comments, because without us using the law to move from a governmental response to a national response, we're not going to be in a position to win this battle. And that is why we're not only using money spending, expenditure of money, fiscal policy, but also legislation and regulations to allow us to win this battle. AG?
Yeah, thank you very much, Prime Minister. In relation to Bahamas, I would only want to observe that it was truly a tragic scene. But the one advantage that I think the Bahamas has going for it is that New Providence Island, which is where Nassau is largely untouched. So what we saw when we landed was a government shell-shocked, but it might have been a government that could still function because they had a space, airports, banks, a whole infrastructure that was still fully operational. We wouldn't have that luxury in Barbados if Barbados suffered that kind of hit. Just about everything would be gone, and I think it's important for us to reflect on that. In terms of the kind of legislative framework that we would want to implement to ensure that the needed things get done in Barbados, perhaps the centerpiece of it would be some amendments to our health service regulations, which date back to 1969. At that time, of course, the issues were very different, but even then, the idea of individuals being made responsible in law for cleaning up areas, maintaining not just sanitary conditions, but getting rid of bush, getting rid of garbage, all these kinds of things. These are not new. The Prime Minister is constantly talking about it now, but as far back as 1969, the regulations were there. Over the years, though, it seems as though we've paid less and less attention to it. But certainly last year when we had to deal with Kirk, looking at the simple cause of major flooding in the Orleans area, largely because drains had been blocked with plastic bags, largely because areas that should have been cleared of grass and bush had not been cleared of grass and bush. So a small ministerial committee made up of the Minister of Health, Minister of Public Works, Minister of the Environment, and myself will be looking at the health service regulations over the next week or two to see how we can make the appropriate amendments to ensure that Barbadians once again are encouraged to take care of their open spaces, But if they do not, then we want to make sure that the government is able to move in, deal with those things, and to ensure that the homeowner or the owner of the real estate will pay the price. We're not interested, as the Prime Minister said, in making anybody a criminal, but we do have to motivate people towards the kind of conduct that staves off disaster and challenges for a government. The Prime Minister reflected today on the fact that just a week ago we had to call in individuals to clear drains and gutters and so on. That is